Hello and welcome back to Empyrion Galactic Survival. My name is Spanj and welcome to this Spanj's Build Academy video, and today we are going to take a look at how to build a basic SV. And in this episode we're going to build this thing in front of us, which is, well, actually anything but a basic SV. But it is a starter SV, and I just want to give you guys that are new to the game a bit more information about how to build an SV and what's really required. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is head on into a new creative game, okay, or resume one if you've already got one. But just go to new single player, creative, and then you probably want to choose something in space. It's just going to be a little bit easier to build. Go ahead and just start that straight away. So I would say that even if you're only into your first survival game and you're still getting used to the game, it's worth coming out of that and jumping into creative mode to get a feel for the blocks and building before you attempt to build something in survival mode. So here we are in creative mode, and you'll start on a little platform a bit like this, and there's a rapier in front of you and you've got a nice little view of Earth. We're just going to ignore all of that, although I will say that the creative library in this space station here is pretty useful for new builders if you want to check it out. Oh, and you can fly through things like I am right now if you just hit the G button. That turns on and off God mode. Anyway, let's fly out into space a little bit over here, find a clear area to work from, and then we're just going to hit up the H menu, and this is going to give us all the items in the game, and we can just spawn them into our inventory. So with small vessels, the first block you're going to need is obviously a small vessel starter. Well, I say obviously, for new players that's not really obvious. First thing you might do is come along to this little button here, and if you click on the blocks icon with that highlighted, the starter block isn't even there. You actually need to click on this all types, and then the starter blocks appear. So yeah, for new players, just clicking on that might get a little bit confused. Where do I start? Cockpit maybe? Nah. You just have to go back to blocks on the all filter, grab a small vessel starter, and then we can start building our first ship. So the first items, or the most essential items of a small vessel, are a cockpit, somewhere to sit, a generator, a fuel tank, and a number of thrusters. New to the game as well, recently added, is these small generators and small fuel tanks, which are a lot cheaper but obviously generate a lot less output. Now there's a lot more devices here and options that you can throw into your small vessel, but I'm just going to cover the basics, and then we're going to go through actually building. In order to get a small vessel to work just in the most basic form possible, like I said, you just need a cockpit, strap one there, a generator, a fuel tank, and a thruster in every direction. So you'll need to rotate blocks in order to do this bit. You can check out the controls on how to do that, but in every direction that the ship is required to move. And there we go. Just turn my flashlight on so we can actually see. Now that ship now will technically work. I can put some fuel in it. Let me just grab some. Get inside, hit the P button to open the control panel, fill all of the fuel tank, press Y to power her on, and she will now fly around and work and move in all directions. But, you know, as you can see, she's a bit limited in every other way, really. She's not going to move very fast, she's not going to maneuver very fast, and she hasn't really got any equipment whatsoever to make her of any use. But if you're wondering why your SV is not moving, or perhaps wondering what it takes to actually get one to move, that's the bare essentials, that's the absolute minimum. Now let's think about actually building one for real. Now before we start, we have a number of things to consider. We need to think about what role this ship is going to have, what function. So is it going to be warp capable? Does it need to take passengers? Are you playing multiplayer? Is it going to need to carry cargo? Is it a scout? That sort of thing. What role or function does this ship mean? Now we're for the purpose of this video, we're talking about the first basic starter SV that you're going to be using in the game. So very limited resources, so we're going to be keeping our costs down to try and make it cost minimal. But when you're building in your games, you might be thinking, okay, well, I want all the weapons, I want all the thrusters, it's going to be super powerful, which is fine, which is great. But obviously you just need to consider, before you start building, all the items that you're going to fit in there, in order to figure out what sort of layout, shape it's going to be, what size it's going to be. If you're also playing with the CPU system switched on, and this is the system where it limits the number of devices and thrusters that you can have depending on what CPU tier the vessel is at. So you've got tiers 1 through to 4, and they all have a maximum limit basically. The higher the tier, the more expensive it becomes. So if you are playing with that on, you also need to consider what tier you want this ship to be. The last thing is thruster placement. Thrusters and where they're placed now have a much more important role in how the ship behaves in terms of pitch, yaw and roll. And we're going to go into that in a lot more detail later with the statistics panel. But for now, let's grab the devices we need for the purpose of this video. And we're making a starter SV, so it's going to need to be very cheap. We're going to keep it within tier 1 CPU, and the role is just going to be single player. Okay, so we've got our small vessel starter block. I'm going to grab a cockpit, a generator, 2 fuel tanks in this case, a number of small thrusters. I'm just going to grab a bunch because I don't know how many I'm going to use at this point. And we're just going to grab a few basics like an O2 station, a couple of O2 tanks, a couple of landing gears, we're going to need those, a spotlight, armor locker, constructor, and some cargo boxes. We're going to need an ammo box, some extensions, and some cargo boxes. And that's going to be about it. And maybe a Wi-Fi and a detector, well, the detector maybe. And we're going to give our ship guns. So over on the tools tab here, we're going to get a couple of GATs, and that's going to be it. We're going to see if we can get all of that into a tier 1 CPU ship. Alright, let's go ahead and place our small vessel starter block. We're now going to need some actual blocks. So I'm going to build this out of a combination of 2 materials, steel and plastic, or carbon composite as it's now known. First of all, when you've got your starter block here, I like to remove all the blocks around this core. You can tell the core is the one in the middle. It looks a little different from the rest. Holding shift, I can right click a block as long as I've got a block in my hand. Selected on the toolbar, you can see number 1 is highlighted. That means that if I left click, I will place a block. If I hold shift and right click, it will remove the block that my cursor is currently pointing at. Now, with all the blocks removed, try and remember which way was forward, which is this end here. We're going to point at the core, and we're going to press the N key. We're going to click on Symmetry Plane, and we're going to click YZ, and then click on the core. We're just going to click again just to move this green field right into the center of the core. This is our symmetry plane, and this allows us to very much quicken the build process, especially if we're building a symmetrical ship. Obviously, if you're building an asymmetrical ship, then it's not very much help for you. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to turn it on, and YZ is left to right. We can also select XZ, which is up and down, and XY, which is another pain. Another right to left, but at a different angle. Anyway, there we go. So YZ, nice green field. We hit escape to close that, and we can move back around again. So we know the front of the ship is that direction there. I'm just going to put blocks there so that it's so that I don't forget that. Once you've considered the things that we spoke about earlier, you can go ahead and place some of the largest components. Now, if you're building with warp capable, you probably want to start with the warp core, the cockpit, and the really largest sort of thrusters that you're going to have, and that's going to help you gauge the size of the ship and how many blocks you're going to use. I'm going to go ahead and put down my favorite cockpit at the moment, which is this one, which is quite a big cockpit, and especially quite big for a starter SV as well. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge to get everything in and keep it nice and compact and good looking and stuff. For anybody that's new to the game, getting things good looking is not, you don't need to worry about that just yet, really. It can come a bit later. Anyway, let's go ahead and place down the absolute essentials that we need. I'm going to be a little bit rebellious with this, and I'm going to have the fuel tank sticking out the side of there. I have a shape in mind. I'm going to try and build that shape. So we've got our fuel tanks, we've got our generator. Let's put some O2 tanks as well, because we're going to need some oxygen in order to fuel our oxygen station. If we go back into our inventory, we've got a few more things that we can put on the interior that we do not need to have direct access. Now, that's another thing to consider. You don't need anything to have direct access. You can access it all through the control panel. If I go ahead and put my armor locker down here, now normally in order to access an armor locker you have to go up to it and press F. You can then swap your armor out or in as you need to. But if you don't have direct access to your armor locker, you can use the P menu, the control panel, just by pressing P, go to devices, locate your armor locker and press access, and you can access it that way. It's a little bit more convoluted, so most builders generally favor direct access with things like that. And that's something, if you want, you're going to need to also factor into your build design. Direct access to those devices such as armor lockers, O2 stations, containers, fridges, constructors, all can be used with direct access or access through the control panel. For me personally, I like to leave that part to the end so that I have my overall shape laid out and it's not going to get in the way of that, and I can try and figure out from where in the armor I could maybe place those devices. It doesn't always work, sometimes it does bite me in the ass, but anyway, let's place down, this is our ammo container. So this again doesn't need direct access because you can access it directly through the control panel, and it has another shortcut as well. But we're going to give ourselves a little bit of ammo capacity that will allow us to have some Gatling guns. Now I'm going to use steel for the next bit because this is going to be part of our outer armor, and it's going to look a bit weird when you're watching someone build like this, when you don't know what they're building. Things will look odd, but I'm going to put my gats in at this point here. She's a good looking bird already, isn't she? Anyway, let's talk about thrusters next. So thruster placement is, like I said at the beginning of the video, it's recently changed. So with 11.5, the version that we have now, the version this video is recorded in, thruster placement is now much more important in terms of where on the craft the thrusters are actually positioned. Whereas before, you could have them all sort of clustered in a single area, and the turning, pitch and yaw of the craft would be more dictated by the RCSs of the craft rather than the thrusters and where they are. Now it's a case that the more spread out the thrusters, the better performance you get from them. So these thrusters will not only contribute thrust in that direction, whatever direction they're facing in, but also torque in terms of pitch, yaw and roll. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to position these thrusters where I think I want them, and then I'm going to remove a bunch of blocks. I'm just going to place a bunch of blocks in order to place the thrusters basically. So there's my down thrusters there. I think I'm going to want my forward thrusters. These are a little less important, I'll admit. They're in there. My reverse ones, however, I want to be quite far forward. Around about there. And I'm also going to put down thrust there as well, a directional thrust there as well. So we've got 3 directions just on this point at the front of the ship here, and we're going to add another left thrust at this end as well. Sorry, left-right thrust. And we want to add another lifting thrust, so a downward facing over here as well. So basically we have 2 to 4 thrusters in all directions. Because this is going to be a somewhat larger than normal starter ship, I think that will do nicely. We now have a basic shape, and it's now a case of finishing that shape in the most efficient way possible to keep the costs down. Now, before we continue any further, you do want to just double check, especially if you're building with CPU switched on, as I am, that our CPU allocation does not exceed how much we actually have available. So as we can see, we have allocated 3,000, but we have a maximum of 6,000 under a tier 1 CPU. Now if we continue building out a steel, this thing's going to be too heavy for the thrusters we've given it. So for the rest of the build, probably going to use plastic, and steel is going to be reserved just to go around the center part or any important components like in front of this fuel tank. That way, if anything was to shoot us, the fuel tank is protected by the most armor. You could tell the difference, if you like, if you grab a multi-tool from the item menu, that's under tools, open it up to anything, and it looks a bit like that. You can then see the hit points of each block. So you can see the hit points of this steel block are 50, and the hit points of this plastic or carbon composite is 20. But at the same time, steel is 8 kilograms compared to 3 kilograms. And if you're going to be playing weights and volume switched on, weight can have a massive impact. So anyway, now that we've got our blocks and stuff in place, we're going to try and complete this build, and then we're going to go through the final placement of the last devices, i.e. the armor locker, O2 station, mobile constructor, all while trying to keep it under that 6,000 CPU. We're halfway through that, so hopefully it'll be okay. And so once you've placed all the blocks and you've got the shape that you want, you're reasonably happy with the design and overall look of the ship, this is when you can start testing it. Now, at this point, most of the weight of the ship is kind of distributed. There are a few tools in order to help you while you're building to figure out where the distribution of weight is. Again, we can hit N, go to debug, and show the center of the mass. And you want the two yellow and blue spheres to be pretty close together in the center of the ship. This should be a reasonably balanced craft as a result. Before we go ahead and put the final sort of decoration, texture and things like that on the ship, we really need to give it a test. So I've put some fuel in it, and we're going to jump in and have a little fly around. Now if you're like me, you've got a ship here with no RCSs in there, then you're probably going to find it turns and rolls a little bit sluggishly, but it is able to move in all directions. Bear in mind we're also only using small thrusters here. We can also check our statistic panel in the control panel, and we can see the sort of thrust achievement we're going to get, the degrees per second in yaw, pitch and roll, and a lot of useful information here to try and gauge sort of where we have power and what sort of adjustments we may want to make to the thrusters. But ultimately, you know, numbers for me especially, they don't really mean much. I need to fly it and see what it feels like. So fly around in space, make sure it moves in all directions. You're reasonably happy with the responsiveness. I have to say the roll on this is pretty slow, but I think it's okay for what it is. We're going to take it down now into a planet's atmosphere and subject it to 1 G's gravity. I'm going to fly it around down there as well and see what the result is. So we can see we got a max speed in this craft of 40 meters a second, which isn't amazing, but you know, it could be worse. This is a starter SV, believe it or not, considering the size of it. Yeah, so we're achieving 50 at the moment because we're heading towards the ground, but as we level out, the speed will drop off down to about 40. Use the O key to make sure we are at absolute level, which we are. And we're achieving 40 meters a second. Now, what I've done in this craft, because of its slightly bigger than what it needs to be size, is there's space inside to upgrade these thrusters. Well, some of them anyway. These front ones not so much, but certainly the ones, all of the ones in the back quarter can be upgraded to mediums. They have the space behind them for the extra block. Just make sure that when you're testing the craft here that you're just happy with the general feel of the flight. And if you're not, you might want to readjust where those thrusters are, which might require a little remodeling. If you're happy with the ship's performance, then just do a number of final checks before you start painting and decorating. Hit up the control panel, double check those CPU statistics. In a creative session, If you go over your allocated CPU, you will not notice. The ship will still perform. CPU is disabled by default in creative sessions. If you are over and you're seeing an efficiency level of, say, between 80 and 100%, take it into a survival game with CPU enabled and give it a whirl there to see what the impact really is. Also, just make sure on the devices that if you scroll to the top of the list, there's nothing there that says missing. It will be in yellow if it is, and you probably won't be able to fly it if there is anything missing, but just double check. Also, this is a good opportunity to hit that auto group button and group all your devices into nice groups, ready for any signal logic you want to do. And that's it, pretty much, aside from decorating, which you can see a little bit more on in my video about how to use the color and texture tool. That is it. That is your SV, your first small vessel built. Once you have finished your ship, just make sure that you press Alt-O while looking at your ship, and this will enable you to save the ship as a blueprint. So just go Save As, give it a name, and then just click Save. That will save it. Now when you go back into your survival game, hit up F2, and you should be able to search for your ship that you've just created. Now once you've got the resources, we can see here that I'm going to need a good old 500 carbon substrate to bring this thing in, and 228 copper. Once we've got those in our factory, we'll be able to spawn it into our single player game, our survival game, and there we go. That's how you build a basic SV, and this one I've nowhere near is anything but basic, but hopefully you guys have got the information now to go ahead and build something much more appropriate to what this video should have been. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And just remember, just before I go, if you've got any questions, queries about building, go ahead and join my Discord, link down below, and join in the discussion in the builders channels. There's loads of guys in there, a great community of people that can help you out with any questions you might have about building in Empyrion. Anyway, once again, thanks very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.